Welcome to Genealogy Methods. So, this class is all about strategy. I want to go through 4 very common genealogy brick walls, hang-ups that we get, and talk through how I attack it as a professional genealogist. These are the 4 different topics we're going to go through tonight, 4 different case studies. We all have somebody that just drops out of the sky and we have no idea where they came from. Then we'll talk through somebody that disappears, like blink and you miss them. They're only in a space for a short amount of time. We'll talk about people with changing names or aliases and different strategies you can employ there. And then we're going to talk about getting somebody across the water, different ways that you can go about finding somebody's origins when it's from a different country. And we're going to walk through different tactics for that because it's so nuanced depending on where somebody's from. We're just going to go through the general steps on that rather than a specific case study. Our first case study is an ancestor without origin. And that's very common. More often than not, it is a female, usually. That's the person that just shows up already married with children, and you have no idea where they came from because obviously there are a lot fewer records for females throughout history. So, this case study, though, we're going to go through is for a man that just shows up married with children. I'm going to show you how I analyze what a client already has for research holes, but you can use this sort of tactic to analyze the research that you've already put into someone to see if you can figure out additional things that might lead to their origins. I'm going to talk through my thought process on how I do this. Basically, I just pull on loose threads until it unravels, usually facts. That's usually the biggest thing that helps me break through something when a client can't figure it out is I attack the facts that they know to be true and I try to find a hole in there because that's usually the hang up is that something you've believed to be true actually isn't. So you need to be doubting and trying to pick apart every tiny fact you're depending on. So you need to recognize and note different details that can be significant when you're looking at records. Like in this example here, I have John Downey, and there were no records for him prior to the 1880 census when he's already married to Agnes Book and living in Ohio. Now, he should show up with parents or some family on the 1860 or 1870 census because every U.S. census after 1850, and including 1850, lists everyone in a household, not just the head of household. You run into a lot of trouble prior to 1850 because it's only listing the head of household and you have no idea who else is accounted for in those tick marks for the age and gender brackets. So the client that hired me to work on this had 3 children plus the spouses in the tree. And the first thing I'm going to do is follow all records for the children because the children of my target ancestor might have hints in their family records. And that's always my first priority is to go at least 1 generation down from the target ancestor and fully analyze everything in those children's records to get a feel for the family so that I can start to notice information that might be significant to their father, and it will help me better understand correct records for the father once I dig into his records. So, John Downey lived his entire adult life in Ohio, but the client believed that he was born in Pennsylvania. So, my first step in looking at the children's records is to see if all 3 children's census records agree if their father was born in Pennsylvania. 1880 is the first U.S. Census to ask for the birthplace of parents. So I started looking at all of those records. And the first thing I noticed was that the client had not filled in census records or many records at all for the children of the person she's researching. So I start applying all of those records. Most of the records in her tree were that ancestry family trees listed as a source. That is not a source. That means she just copied the records from somebody else's tree or copied the information and did not actually look at the sources to verify if things were correct. She just copied her neighbor's work, which you should never ever do. In fact, if you have that ancestry family trees source in your tree, I recommend you go back and verify everything on that person and then delete that. That is not a source. So I went through the census records as I attached them. And I looked at the images because you always want to see if something was missed or recorded incorrectly on the indexed information. Sometimes it will be transcription errors, sometimes missing household members that you'll only see on an image, like grandparents, uncles, or cousins. Plus, you want to look at the neighbors, see if there are any hints in there. So I viewed all of those census records for the children, and everybody agreed that they think their father was born in Pennsylvania. So I have a good feel for the family now after looking through all of these children's records. Now I'm going to focus on the subject's wife, John Downey's wife, and see if I can find any clues in her records. So I look at the wife's records. I see that my client has saved information that she was born in Pennsylvania and that she died in Ohio. But I really need to see counties where this person was born. So always strive to at least add county if you don't know the town. So I need to try to find information about her birth and her death to see if it relates to John Downey, her future husband, because a lot of times families have known each other for generations, or maybe they all came from the same place and migrated together. You will see that frequently. I would say 60% of the time, maybe. So, especially, in 1850s and earlier, spouses will have grown up within 5 miles of each other. You don't go very far to find your spouse. You'll see them as childhood neighbors. Sometimes you'll even find the husband in the household of the wife as maybe a farmhand, farm laborer, a lodger. So I also noticed in her tree that many of the hints for the wife had not been applied or declined, just nothing. Even though the client had claimed she'd tried everything, I could see that there were so many clues she had not explored yet. You've never tried everything. There's always something else you can try. So my client had believed that John Downey was born in Washington County, Pennsylvania, but I didn't see any evidence of that. But I wanted to double check how far of a distance that truly was from where he was living when he married her in Lowellville, Ohio. So I looked, and that seems like a reasonable distance to have traveled in that time period. Likely at the kind of the advent of a lot of rail travel at that point. So it seemed a reasonable distance. I always plot things out on a map so I can visualize it and see if there might be other clues there about how easy it was to travel, like if it was on a river, or if it was on a railroad, or if it seemed like a natural migration path for people. So I looked into Agnes's parents next. I wanted to see if there might be any Downey records associated with her father. Maybe he knew other Downeys and that could explain why they ended up marrying each other. A lot of land records, maybe they were neighbors. I didn't see anything. And I also didn't see any ties to Washington County, Pennsylvania for her parents. I thought maybe there could be. But I did notice that her father owned a lot of land. Now, if somebody owns a lot of land, they're not going to just let their daughter marry some random person that they don't know who just showed up. So that makes me think that perhaps John Downey was already established in that community before Agnes Book married him. After all of this preliminary work, I'm finally to a point where I'm going to start analyzing John and his records. I feel like I've built a foundation enough now that I will notice relevant details to help find his origins. I'll notice things that maybe don't add up to the other records I've seen. I'm going to recognize inconsistencies and research holes. So right away, when I'm looking at the information on his profile on his ancestry tree, a red flag I see is exact birth date and location, and the only source for it is Find a Grave. There are no other records indicating that's correct. And if you'll notice there on his gravestone, there are not exact dates. They're either on Find a Grave. So where did those exact dates come from? A lot of times they're unfortunately just fabricated. There are no documents to back up those dates, and people just copy them over and over in a loop and perpetuate incorrect dates that are unsourced. But I wanted to see if there might be some way to find an actual document to back this up, since people can just enter whatever they want on Find a Grave. So I also look at the cemetery map to see where it is, and I see it's right on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. So a lot of times when you find something like that, the answer is that this person grew up just on the other side of the border because, borders are arbitrary. Somebody was, in that proximity and just happened to move 1 mile west and ended up in Ohio. So pay attention to that. So I looked in the neighboring county for some Downies, and I didn't see them just across the line in Pennsylvania. So then I'm going to move on to some other ideas. I opened up all of the censuses and the census images for John Downey to look for any inconsistencies, because the info is only as reliable as the person giving it, and maybe he didn't answer the census himself. Maybe there were fluctuations that give me more details. But his stuff was pretty consistent here. His answers line up, aging 10 years per census. Obviously, 1890 is missing because it was destroyed. He always answers that both of his parents were born in Pennsylvania. When I was analyzing the census images to see if the indexing missed anything, I did notice on the 1910 census that it missed Margaret McFarland living in their household as a sister-in-law. So I thought that was worth exploring because she was also born in Pennsylvania. So I did some more research on her to determine who she was, and turns out she was Agnes's sister who was widowed. So not a connection to John, but you still need to look for these potential leads, these potential breadcrumbs, and follow them. Also, always check the neighbors. Like if you had looked here and the next door neighbor was also from Pennsylvania, see if you can see where they were from. Maybe it could have been John's sister in the house next door. But you can see right there that they were Austrian and spoke Polish and Yiddish, so they were not really a match for John Downey's family. Looking in her tree, I saw that she did not have a death certificate for John, even though he died in 1940, when death certificates would have been widely recorded at the state level. Usually, the beginning of the 1900s is when they started at state level. Before that, counties often kept a death register that you can find on Family Search. So I saw that she had not gone out to Family Search to look for additional records. Anytime Ancestry doesn't have something, go check Family Search. So I easily found one on Family Search, and I see the birth date listed there, but it does differ from that Find a Grave date we saw by 18 days. So I think somebody just put the wrong date on that Find a Grave. It doesn't mean that they actually knew better than the death certificate. And it does list a birthplace of California, Pennsylvania, which is in Washington County. So then I look at the informant. It is his oldest child, Martha. And since I'd already looked at all of the census records, I know that she lived with her parents her whole life. The best informant you can find is an unmarried daughter or son, especially one who is like 67 and still living at home at the time of the death. She lists her grandfather as John Downey, but name and birthplace of grandma as don't know. So that is a clear indication to me that her paternal grandparents were not part of her 67 years living in Louisville, Ohio. Perhaps they both died before she was born or did not migrate to Ohio with her dad. So always analyze what those details mean. Read between the lines. If, the daughter that's lived there her whole life with her parents doesn't know the names of her grandparents, that's telling you that they were not adjacent to her family during her lifetime. So we have now found all records available from John Downey and Agnes Book's marriage forward from that first census in 1880. So the next goal, now that we've had that anchor point and we've moved forward, the next goal is to move that anchor point backwards. What is the closest thing we can find to their marriage that might hold some clues? So, according to the 1900 census, the year they were married was 1872. So, let's see if we can find John Downey in the vicinity around 1870 on that census before he married Agnes Book. Because, again, I don't think he just randomly showed up out of nowhere and married into this family that owned a lot of land. So I looked, and the client did not have Agnes on the 1870 census either. There's a very good chance he was nearby 2 years before they married. So I looked and I found her living in Poland Township, Mahoning County, Ohio, near Louisville, and she's living with her parents. So I'm going to go out to Ancestry and search that same area for a John Downey. Just a few minutes of searching finds a John Downey in the same township. Now, note that even if somebody's not in the same township, they can be neighbors. It's just one person's on one side of the border, one's on the other. You can look at county plat maps to see what land borders a township line. Borders are arbitrary. So this did not show up in Ancestry hints. Hints only show up in your profile if the record's attached to someone else's tree. So that's how Ancestry hints work. They're just looking at other trees, comparing them, and sending you records others have attached. They are not saying that this record is likely right. It's just saying somebody else has attached this. So nobody else had attached it to their tree. If you don't go out and search, that hint would never show up for you. So we've got a 15-year-old John D. Downey living with 17-year-old Henry Downey and 17-year-old William Downey. They're all day laborers and all born in Pennsylvania. The next household up shows George Downey, age 30, a coal miner, and Kate Lemon, 27, single mother of the other two children, possibly. There's also a Margaret Downey in the household, age 74. Could that be a grandma? And this is illustrating, too, that you need to open up the image so that you can see those other Downeys in the household next door. So I look back at that Agnes Book 1870 census. That's only 2 pages away from this John Downey. This is lining up to be very likely the right John Downey, even though it's kind of hard to tell what the family dynamic is there. So obviously, case closed, right? Nothing more to do? Nope. You have to try to disprove it now. Try to disprove something as much as you try to prove it. So I start searching for any other Downey families in the area. I follow all of those other Downeys in that household out as far as I can, looking for other records. I look some more to see if there could be concurrent records indicating this is 2 different John Downeys in the area. Nothing else was found. I looked to see if those other Downeys had maybe moved elsewhere. They hadn't. They stayed in the same area. So the next step in this case would be to search for any other types of like marriage documents or probate or burial records or anything else to make, conclusive proof that this is the same person and there were not 2 men of the same name. Now, the best place for doing that would be on Family Search, full text search for following out all of the other people. And then looking in the 1880 census, trying to find them in 1860, and just continuing that way. We've talked about individuals just appearing out of thin air, married with children. Now we're going to talk about somebody who appears out of nowhere and then promptly disappears again. Sort of a blink and you miss them situation. So, what can you do to follow these ghosts? We're going to talk through some more strategies for how you attack a problem like this. In this example, we have George Murray, and he appears in 1900 on the census, but then he has disappeared by 1910. My client is his great granddaughter, and the family has no idea what has happened to him since 1900. They assumed he had died, but she always wondered about it, so she hired me to look into it. So, with George C. Murray, there were only two documents on Ancestry that were 100% the right guy. There was a West Virginia marriage to my client's great grandmother, Nettie Long, in 1899. And that's the right guy for sure. He was using the middle initial of C. The main thing to notice on that West Virginia marriage is that it's an index only on Ancestry. So right away, I note that I'm going to need to try to find that original document because maybe there's more information than what is showing up here in the index. Then there's the 1900 census. He's married to Nettie with 5-month-old George Jr. in the household. So I note on that census that George Sr. says he's born in Pennsylvania, May of 1865. He says both of his parents were born in Pennsylvania. So one thing jumps out at me right away as a significant detail, his occupation. He's a railroad conductor. That is an easy way to travel, and it is a skilled occupation, which makes it easier to trace. It's much harder to trace somebody that's just like a day laborer or other unskilled profession. I see in the household, because you need to look at everybody in the household, that there's also a 79-year-old Mary Hayes. Could that maybe be his mother with a new husband's last name, widowed, something like that? And I double check her. I follow her to see if there are any other details. Nope, she was just a lodger. That was it. You always need to check though. It also jumps out at me that he's 35 and she's 16. So my next step is to move forward from those anchor dates because we had 1899 and 1900. Those are the anchor point where we know we have the right guy. You can't just skip to the beginning or skip to the end because then how do you know you have the right George Murray? That's a common name. Could be anybody. So you've got to just inch forward and inch backwards. So here I'm going forward to the 1910 census. I look at Nettie. And I see that she lists that she's divorced. Now, it's very common for a woman to say she is widowed when actually she just had kind of an informal divorce or even a formal divorce. There was less stigma if you said you were widowed, so people often lied and said that. Now, since she's saying divorced, that makes me think he didn't really die. He probably is still living. And I see that her son, both of her children actually, are living with her parents and uncles in Wheeling, West Virginia, while she is living with an uncle. Now, father's nowhere to be found. I checked the census in West Virginia for 1910, and there was nobody resembling George Murray. On Ancestry, you can also search by first name only. So I searched the area just for George, the right age, born in Pennsylvania. Nobody there. On Family Search, you do have to have a last name. You can't just search on a first name. I looked at Wheeling, West Virginia death records for 1900 to 1910. They are very well represented online. He was not in them. The next obvious step is to try to find that original marriage document. See if there's more information. Because we're working with a really small window of time here. We only know 1899 and 1900 in one place, Wheeling, West Virginia. So I searched newspapers first. Sometimes you'll find big marriage announcements or like county clerk notice in the newspaper. And then always look for the original certificate because you're always going to hope that the marriage will list parents or maybe it'll have a brother or a sister as a witness because sometimes it's that easy. Ancestry only had the index for the marriage record and Family Search had the original. I was easily able to find that. I was encouraged that George also lists his birthplace of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, so far more specific here. It's not always correct, but it is a lead, something to follow. Maybe he was from a smaller town near Harrisburg. People did often round up to the largest recognizable place. You never know. I also note that this document contains an original signature from him. That can be very useful. I see that their son George was born only 6 months after that marriage date. So now what? 1890 census was destroyed, so I don't really have that to go off of. So I'm going to try a different direction. I'm going to look in city directories. I notice that they are very well represented for Wheeling, West Virginia every couple of years. There are a lot of them out there on all of the genealogy sites now. Sometimes they'll even exist for small towns. Sometimes they are kind of like lumped into the bigger metro area. This is the best way to document people between censuses. So I'm going to work backwards. I look in 1898, and there's a George C. Murray renting a bedroom on Maine. Occupation is railroad conductor. It even lists the rail line as Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis Railway. In 1896, it's the same man at the same address and employer, same job. 1892, same man at same railroad, same address, but only a brakeman with the same railroad. 1890, same man, same railroad, same address, still a brakeman. So now I know that he was in Wheeling by 1890. He does not show up in any earlier directories, but that's expanded 9 years earlier than we knew he was there before. Now I'm going to try going forward from 1899 and 1900. 1901 is the next directory. Nope, he is not in there. The only George Murray in there is George H., who is retired, and then there's also George W., who is a contractor. And our guy was not old enough to retire and would not spontaneously change careers when he was a railroad conductor, a good job. So he's gone by 1901. His second son, Norman Leslie, was born in June of 1901. So I'm guessing that George Sr. was probably already gone before his second son was even born. So no wonder the family has no idea what happened to him. My next step is to go back to newspapers because the Wheeling, West Virginia papers were pretty well available. So maybe there is a divorce mention in the legal notices or a death record to explain his disappearance. I don't see anything about Nettie, but I did find an 1893 court summons for George C. Murray versus Flora Murray. As a side note, people were pretty consistent with their middle initials to set themselves apart from somebody else of the same name. So if you see somebody suddenly using one and they hadn't before, they may not be the right person, and you should investigate that because they're typically pretty consistent. So I looked on Family Search for more records regarding this court record. This legal notice from the paper. That's giving me a sign that I should look on Family Search, and I think the best place to look would be in full text search. If you're not familiar with how to use that, I wrote a whole research guide about it in my online shop. The legal notice says it was in Chancery Court, so I find Ohio County, West Virginia Chancery Court documents. The details say that George is the instigator of the divorce, and it says Flora abandoned him for at least 3 years. Sometimes people will file these divorces in a state where the wife doesn't even live, so she may never know. She may not see the legal notices in the paper. He said he had resided in Wheeling for at least 1 year prior to this. So the most promising detail in here is there's a Charles E. Murray that gives a deposition. So could that be a brother? It's another person to try to corroborate that I have the right guy in other records. I can see that this is the right George C. Murray in this record because based on the city directories we'd already looked at, there was no other George C. Murray in town. So this is the right guy, and he has a wife named Flora here. And there were no other George Murray's with a Flora wife in the area, or any indication that Flora had ever been there. So I start looking for marriage records for a George C. Murray and a Flora anywhere. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1887, I find a George C. Murray marrying Florence Shireman. This George C. Murray is the right age to be our guy. The marriage date is 3 years prior to when he shows up in Wheeling, West Virginia. So it's a pretty solid theory, but I'm going to try to poke holes in it. And these marriage records for them list their parents' names. There's not a lot of information for Florence there, but it did list William E. Murray as a father to George. So that's another lead for me to follow. I checked maps to see if that is a reasonable distance for the time for George to have traveled. And it's pretty far, but as a railroad conductor, that's a pretty reasonable distance for him to have traveled in that time period. Big takeaway from that original document that was the marriage to Flora is that it had a signature. So I compared the 1887 and 1899 signatures, and they're very close, especially the way he writes the G and the C. Only the M is off a little bit, but always compare signatures whenever possible. And looking back at the other marriage license from 1899, it's important to note who wrote which things on here. You can see at the bottom that these are different hands. The top is the facts from the person obtaining the license, which is in George's hand, and the bottom is from the county clerk. So make sure you're getting the right person's information when you are comparing signatures. Now that I have this lead, I'm going to try to disprove it. See if I can find concurrent records to show that they are different men. So I look at the 1900 census for Florence Shireman Murray because I know George was definitely in Wheeling. It's pretty rare for somebody to be missed and pretty rare for somebody to be counted twice. If he was on this census with her, then it's probably two different guys. But guess what? No George. Flora is living with her brother Rufus Shireman. She says she's widowed, but as we already talked about, that was pretty common for people who were divorced or perhaps abandoned. The most intriguing thing on here is that there are two sons. She has two sons, William E. and Weir P. So I move on to the 1910 census for Flora. Guess what? George is back from the dead. She is no longer widowed. He's living with Flora, her brother Rufus, and son Weir in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The name is mistranscribed as Leo C. Murray because it was written as an abbreviation of GEO for George. So I had opened it up and I could see on the actual census that that was the case. Now, the occupation doesn't really line up, so that makes me doubt it a little bit. This guy is a driver for the fire company. That's, less likely considering he was a railroad guy, but maybe he had needed to change occupations here at 47. It's hard to know. I looked for George C. Murray's nationwide on the 1910 census, and there weren't really other contenders to be him. So now let's follow those newfound children and see if there's any indication in there that they are the children of the same George that we're tracking. So I see that Weir Murray has records where his father is listed as George Clarence Murray. So that's another detail in favor of this theory because my client's grandfather was George Clarence Murray, the one that was born to Nettie Long. George C. did not have an official middle name in any of the other documents that I'd found, only the initial. So this is the first time that I was seeing Clarence written. And I see that in later adulthood, both of these children of Flora are living in Detroit. So I wouldn't have thought to look farther afield than Harrisburg and Wheeling because Detroit's pretty far. So I was surprised to see that. And when you are trying to research people like this, you've got one guy named William Murray, the other guy named Weir Murray. You're going to want to follow the records for Weir Murray because that is the most unique name and it will be easier to follow. So, having followed all records for those sons and still being pretty confident in my theory, I need to try to find something to link Wheeling George to George C. Murray in 1910. So I'm going to go back to city directories and look at the Harrisburg city directories. I checked in 1901. There are 3 George C. Murrays, 2 of them are railroad men, and 1 is a bookkeeper. I then look at all Murrays to see if any of them are living at the same address. William E. Murray is a baggage master and at the same address. That is the same name as George C. Murray stated on his marriage record to Flora Shireman as the name of his father, and that's the same name as his first child with Flora. In the 1900 directory, George C. Murray is not there, but William is. Lines up. He could have been in Wheeling until 1901. He continues to live with William on and off between 1901 and 1909, but not in 1910. So next I'm going to investigate that William E. Murray. I checked the 1910 census for William E. Murray, and turns out he's old enough to be his father. No adult children in the household with him and his wife in 1910. I searched backward. 1880 census has a Clarence Murray of the right age, and also an Emmett Murray. Since George had his middle name here, I was kind of encouraged that this Emmett may be Charles E. Murray, who gave a deposition in support of George's divorce in 1893 Wheeling. So I investigate the family on that census for clues. I look for additional records, and Emmett was indeed Charles Emmett Murray. His 1938 obituary lists a brother named Clarence Murray in Detroit, same place that those 2 children died. I then come up with another marriage for him in 1911. The signature matches the 1899 marriage to Nettie Long in Wheeling. This is our guy. The marriage announcement says he's a driver for the Friendship Fire Company, which matches the 1910 census with Flora Shireman. I connected the dots, and this is the same person. He moved all over between censuses, married constantly, but we have him. We're on the trail. I searched for more information in Detroit since that 1938 obituary said that's where he was. I found him in Detroit in 1920 with another marriage in 1922 at the age of 55. It lists the correct parents when I look at the image. I found a death record for the Detroit George Murray for November 1943 and a birthplace of Greencastle, Pennsylvania, which matches the Murrays of Harrisburg. Further research shows census records where he worked at the same factory as his sons. His son William did die before him, and he's mentioned in the obituary, as is Weir. His son named his own daughter Florence after his own mother, Florence Shireman. And I'm pretty sure at this point that no one knew about Nettie and Wheeling and his 2 kids with her. He goes on to have a 5th child with his 4th wife when he was 60 years old. It took me a solid 6 hours of research to prove it all out and eliminate all other same named individuals. So just keep pulling on loose threads like that until it finally unravels. It's just one big logic problem. And I solved a mystery that had been lost to a family for like 125 years across 4 wives, 4 residences, 3 occupations, and 5 children. Third case study is talking about name changes or aliases. It's more common than you would think, especially like from the early 1900s to the 1930s. So consider that if you have some stubborn ancestor you can't find somewhere, maybe they used multiple names. In this client case, a woman discovered that her grandmother had married 2 different times before she married her grandfather. It had never been mentioned to the family until these records showed up online. And she couldn't find anything about these men. So it was in 1943, Aline Smith married Michael B. Sims in South Mills, Camden County, North Carolina. Aline was 21 from Newport News, Virginia, and Michael B. Sims was 28 from Cleveland, Ohio. Michael says his parents were P.H. Sims and Christine A. Sims. He said his father's dead and his mother is still living at Cleveland. There's a lot of info here, so I thought this was going to be a piece of cake. So you start with the simplest approach. Try to find him in Cleveland around 1943 and earlier. Start with info at face value first. Assume it's correct and go from there. Nothing shows up in the Cleveland area. I note available record sets where he should be, and he should be on the birth index or on the 1940 census, because both things are very widely available. I found other individuals with similar names and same names, and I disproved that they were the same guy by following records for them to have them in different parts where they would not be able to be meeting Allie Smith and marrying her. I searched the last known locations, like for North Carolina marriages and where Eileen lived in Virginia. Maybe they married again. Maybe he married again. Usually you will find somebody remarrying in very close geographic area from where they married the first time with those very quick marriages. The last we'd heard from him was in 1943. So usually you would find something 1944, 1945 in that area. I searched in newspapers for divorce records or marriage announcements. Then next, I searched nationwide on the name Michael B. Sims for any location. There were very few of them, and they were all accounted for in 1943 so that they would not be the same guy. So then I tried to find the parents. Most likely, he should have been living with his mother Christine in the 1940 census. Maybe she was already widowed. There were no records that could be them. Michael should have been showing up with his parents as a 5-year-old in 1920. Didn't see him. Didn't find any death records for those parents either. No city directories. And, Michael B. Sims should have even been in the Cleveland City Directory as an adult because he was 28 in 1943 and living in Cleveland. So he should have been listed. Something wasn't quite adding up here. Maybe Michael was already married. Maybe he wasn't really from Cleveland. Maybe he was from a smaller town nearby. More often than not, people will lie about their names, not their birthplaces, because he's living in a time where people aren't easily able to double check birthplaces. So the name is more often than not the lie. And like parent names usually are pretty close, and dates and locations are pretty accurate usually. Maybe he had shortened his name to Americanize it during World War II. Maybe his last name was really like Simovich or Simkos or Simas, Simkovsky, something like that. I thought the first 3 letters are probably pretty accurate. So I decided to use a wild card and I searched SIM asterisk because that will pull in every letter combination after that asterisk, but it'll keep those first 3 letters constant. Most of the records that were showing up were World War II draft cards, which gave me an idea because signatures are on those draft cards. So what if I could find the right person by comparing handwriting, if I'm pretty sure here that the name was not correct? Signatures do change somewhat, but this would have been really close to his 1943 marriage certificate, and I did have his signature on that. So I grabbed a screenshot of the signature to compare. I went out to the collection of World War II draft cards to search specifically within them and not all records. I entered Michael B. Sim asterisk and Cleveland. I didn't want to put it to exact location because Ancestry will already sort it based on what you enter and give you those most relevant results first and then expand to farther distances because maybe he wasn't really from Cleveland proper, maybe he was just from the Cleveland area. And then I have the signature ready for comparison. Ancestry returned search results with 1,768 individuals. So you can easily narrow and broaden your results based on the different search filters at the top too. I had the closest relevant matches, and I methodically opened each record to compare signatures with that known marriage document signature, which is the bottom entry there. Nothing was quite close enough. Nothing was jumping out at me as a really good lead until I found Mr. Michael B. Simonell. He has the exact same signature as Michael B. Sims. Like you can see how Michael is kind of scrunched, and then you've got the bigger B and then a pretty solid S. It's, really, really close here, and I am convinced this is definitely our guy. We have Michael Byron Simonell, born in Cleveland. Next of kin is his mother, Christine Simonell, just as he put on his marriage certificate, Christine Sims. This shows, though, that in addition to lying about his name, he also lied about his age. He was born in 1907. He claimed when he married Aline that he was 28, but he was actually 36. Further research shows that Simonell wasn't even his birth name. I found him in the 1920 census with his father, Pascal Simonelli, an Italian immigrant. So it took me 3 hours of solid work to find this person. You start with the simplest answers that's usually correct, and then work more and more outside the box. The shocking thing was that the other mystery man that Aline Smith married was also an alias. The last case study we're going to go through is how to find records in other countries to get your family across the water. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is not a case study on an individual person because finding somebody's origins varies so much by where they're from and when they came, etc. This is just going to be general practices to get somebody across the water. Now, a lot of other countries have archives that are online and things are digitized and you can search them for free. But they're going to be harder to use because they're often in other languages and they're unfamiliar platforms and websites. So your best bet will always be to start with Family Search. They will have more international records. But the biggest part with other like immigrant records is you need to find the location first. It's harder to search like you do in the US or Canada where you can just search wide open across a whole country. You really need to narrow it down first. So we need to focus on finding where somebody's from. We're going to start with the easiest options, which would be an obituary, a death certificate. Obituaries for children and death certificates for children. Sometimes you will see an immigrant's child where the obituary will state that their father came from Frankfurt, Germany in 1902. It might have more details. Same with death certificates. Sometimes church records might have more information as well, especially like church baptism or death records or marriage. Or if you can find somebody's marriage in the US, sometimes that will list a place of origin. Especially if you're looking in church records for an immigrant community, like let's say you are in a Slovak Catholic church in Chicago, those records are more likely to have somebody's exact town of birth because the people that they're talking to have a reference point for that. They would know the geography of Slovakia and they'd know how to spell a name, so they often get more exact details. Now that we've done the obvious things, we're going to move into a different direction. And we're going to look at citizenship information on US federal census records. If somebody is listed on here as having naturalization status of NA, that means naturalized. If they have PA, it means first papers have been filed or their declaration of intention to become a citizen. If it says AL, they are an alien. They have not taken any steps to become naturalized. So pay attention to those dates where people have those designations. And remember that somebody may have filed a declaration of intention to become a citizen and never followed through on the actual naturalization. And pay attention to if people immigrated together. A lot of times you will see that maybe the husband came over a few years earlier than the wife. Look for other clues in origins. Like on this 1910 census, it says that people were born in Austria, but they're Bohemian. That's probably, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they were actually from Czech Republic or Slovakia. Or if they're Russian, but they're German, then it's probably part of the Russian Empire, and they were probably living in modern-day Poland now. So kind of create a timeline and figure out when you should be looking for these records, especially based on like empires and boundaries and the dates that somebody came over. The 1920 census shows the year of immigration, naturalization status, year of naturalization, birthplace, and mother tongue. So this is really helpful. Somebody here lived in the Russian Empire, but they spoke German. So their birthplace might be listed by what it was named when they were born or by modern borders. There's no way to really know. But this person's probably from modern day Poland, but they're ethnically German. Next, look for naturalization documents. Not everything will exist for somebody, so you just keep trying and looking for clues. Try searching by name on Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search. Look for county level records in the Family Search catalog. Look at the naturalization and citizenship section. Try Try full text search on Family Search. I have the best luck with naturalization documents on Family Search, especially in the full text search area. Also, Google Family Search Wiki and then the county and the state and see what is listed there for naturalization records. Like here, we have Boston, Massachusetts in Suffolk County, and there is a separate area where you can look for these naturalization records outside of Family Search. The Family Search Wiki will link you to these National Archives records. When you do find naturalization records, they will vary a lot based on when they were recorded. Some of the earlier ones, before 1908, they were at the county level and they made their own forms. It was not standardized. And then after 1908, it became a federal process with standardized forms. Even later ones, like this 1938 one, even have photos in them. Declaration of intention to become a citizen does not necessarily have to be filed in the same place as the naturalization. So you might find notes of where somebody filed it, many, many states away, perhaps at the first place that they lived when they came over. Maybe it'll be something like Frank Soroka here, who never actually naturalized. He only did the declaration of intention, never naturalized. Look for passenger arrival lists. Info will vary by time for what it includes. It might have occupation, others traveling with the same surname. Maybe they're all going to the same destination. Maybe they have contacts for the person in the old country that they were just living with. Just remember that not everybody came through New York. There are lots of other ports to check as well. It wasn't until the Steerage Act of 1820 that it was even a requirement to keep track of ships that were coming and going, let alone passengers. So prior to 1850, you're less likely to find passenger lists that you're looking for because they just don't exist. The oldest one that I was intentionally looking for and found was an 1847 one in New Orleans for Irish immigrants that went up the Mississippi to Dubuque. So that was pretty early, but there's not a lot of information. It did have occupation. That's pretty early to have that, but it did not have great detail about the family's origins. It just said Ireland, but it did note that one of the children did die on passage. Anytime you have an arrival record, look for a departure as well. Look at a map for different ports to see what would have been closest. Might have more info like a village. Like Central and Northern mainland Europeans often left through Hamburg. Remember that Germans were spelling a name and village at the departure. May have taken several ships to get to their final destination. Like from Norway, people often went to Hull, England, then across England by train, and then left for America by Liverpool. Sometimes people went to Montreal, then on to the US. Learn about these paths so that you can see what is the most likely way that your family would have taken. When you do find the name of a ship, always Google it because you might find images, advertisements that your ancestors would have seen about the tickets that they could buy. People typically bought one ticket to go the full route, no matter how many types of transportation it required. Look for ship logs in newspapers, different routes, announcements at arrival in newspapers for ports, even for riverboats too. Talk about crossings in the newspaper. Sometimes it mentions particularly harrowing crossings and what occurred during a family's crossing. It might be in a newspaper, it might be just like the ship captain might talk about how many children were born as the ship crossed, or like when they were attacked by pirates or something like that. So follow every bit of information you can about a ship once you know the name of it and the time of the crossing. And if all of those options still are not helping you, here are some more things you can try. Look for the history of a town. It might say that it was founded by German immigrants from Bavaria. Give you more clues like that. Trace the neighbors if they are from the same places. Trace the witnesses, especially sponsors on baptisms, witnesses at marriages. Trace origins of others in the area with the same surname. Research the origins of a name. See if you could figure out how it might have been changed. A lot of countries also have heat maps for surnames, like Ireland does, Germany does, where you can put in a surname and it'll show you the frequency that it pops up in different areas. So now moving across the ocean. Let's say we have some locations in the old country to explore. I'll show you how to find some of them. Maybe you can find a small village name in Germany. Maybe you have a farm name in Scandinavia. Maybe you're dealing with countries and empires that no longer exist or shifting borders. There are just a lot of variables. If it's not obvious where it is, maybe borders have changed. Like, for instance, Posen, East Prussia is now Poznan, Poland. There are records still there from when it was East Prussia and Posen, German-speaking area. The records don't move. They stay where they've always been. They're now in Polish archives for these German records. Family Search Wiki will tell you where to find them, and Family Search Places will show you the historical changes of names through time for a place. This is a great free resource. It's called MapCarta. It is like Google Maps, but it's more specific. It'll show villages and sometimes even buildings and farms, especially Swedish and Norwegian farms. It'll show them on here with that little green icon and name. And if you've done any Scandinavian research, you'll know that farms are very heavily listed in all records. Sometimes there are clues that farms used to exist in an area just based on bus stop names too, or street names. To just follow all of these geographic clues. A lot of us have German ancestors as well. I want to show you one very specific way to look for German jurisdictions and towns and records. So this will work in all former German areas and some of the former Prussia. So I've got a person from Kreutzberg. I'm going to go to myersgaz.org, Myers Gazetteer, and I'm going to type in Kreutzberg. It might be trial and error to figure out the right Kreutzberg because there are a lot of same named places, but I find the right one for the right area in Rhineland and Prussia. And I'm going to click on that tab. This is free to use, by the way, for ecclesiastical. It shows me the closest church to Kreutzberg, and that is in Altenaar. So that's telling me which parish I should be looking for records in. I'm going to try Family Search first. If it's not there, then try Family Search Wiki or a country's archives. But I go out to Family Search to the catalog and I put in Altenaar. And right there, it shows up with Catholic church books for Altenaar. If you are going out to a country's archive page like Norwegian here, like the Norwegian archives, instead of clicking on the language thing and switching to English, I recommend you just translate the page because you'll often get a lot more information if you just right click in your browser and translate to English than the very abbreviated page that was only written in English for people to visit. This is going to translate what's written in their native tongue. One really cool thing about Czech and Slovak records is that they often list the address in the village, and those addresses often correspond to the current Google Map address. So a lot of times you can type in that address you find in like that 1800 parish record, And then you can do a Google Street View count tours through the little village and see exactly where your ancestor lived. So, while many foreign countries will have free archives, it will be easier for you to start with the Family Search catalog. So, try here first for censuses, immigration information, church records, death records, etc. You're unlikely to find burials anywhere because in a lot of European countries, people just rent cemetery plots, and 5, 10, 20 years later, then somebody else is buried there. So you're unlikely to find that throughout most of Europe. A reminder to check out my other 4 online webinars. You can get these on demand on my site. No particular order that you would need to do these in. The level up ones do not need to go in that exact order. And check out my very detailed, very helpful genealogy research guides on my website that will walk you through exactly how to use these different tools and different websites. And follow me on these social media platforms for daily genealogy tip videos. Thanks for coming.